I'm Jeff Kittner with North Dallas Chamber, and we're pleased to have all of you here today to join us for what should be a great event. It's hard to believe that we're in December already, and we are getting ready for a legislative session coming up in 2021 next month, and we're so excited to hear from our North Dallas legislators today, and thanks to all of them for participating. I want to quickly thank all of our sponsors, Atmos Energy, Children's Health, North Texas Commission, and Charter for participating in our program today and sponsoring this and making it happen. And with that, I'd like to introduce our outstanding legislators who will be joining us today. So first, we've got State Senator Nathan Johnson. Senator Nathan Johnson represents the economically and demographically diverse Senate District 16, which comprises the northern part of Dallas County. Senator Johnson graduated magna cum laude with a degree in physics from the University of Arizona and earned a law degree at the University of Texas at Austin. He practices law in the trial practice group at the law firm of Thompson & Knight, and he's also composed music for the classical concert stage and even scored the hit television series Dragon Ball Z. Senator Johnson passed 22 bills into law during his first legislative session, all with bipartisan support. His emphasis on improving the health of Texas prompted him to author and support a number of healthcare initiatives, ranging from medical coding to Medicaid expansion, with much in between. Heading into the next session, Senator Johnson and his team are developing legislative strategies to foster sustainable economic growth and broaden opportunity. Thanks for being here, Senator Johnson. Our next panelist is State Representative Morgan Meyer. Chairman Meyer represents a legislative district that encompasses downtown Dallas, uptown Dallas, East Dallas, Preston Hollow, the city of University Park, and the town of Highland Park. Chairman Meyer serves as the chair of the House General Investigating Committee and as a member of the Public Education Committee and the Judiciary and Civil Jurisprudence Committees. During his time in the legislature, Chairman Meyer has been a vocal leader on education issues and has also become a go-to leader for the laws that protect our children against human trafficking and sex crimes. He's authored and led to pass Texas's most comprehensive laws on trafficking, including expanding the definition of trafficking and making it easier to charge and prosecute human traffickers. Previously, Chairman Meyer served on the State Affairs, Energy, and Insurance Committees. Chairman Meyer is a partner at the Wick Phillips Law Firm and has almost 2 decades of experience protecting business interests. Thanks for joining us, Chairman Meyer.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you.
And finally, we've got State Representative John Turner. State Representative John Turner was first elected in 2018 to represent House District 114, which covers a large part of north central Dallas. The district includes neighborhoods of Lake Highlands, Hamilton Park, Preston Hollow, and Midway Hollow. He currently serves on the House Appropriations Committee and the House Committee on Environmental Regulation. Representative Turner was born and raised in the East Texas town of Crockett. During summer, he worked for his grandfather's small home building business and as a news and weather broadcaster for the local radio station. After graduating from Crockett High School, he went on to Harvard College and Yale Law School. Representative Turner is an attorney with a Dallas-based law firm, Haynes & Boone, where he specializes in business litigation. He has also devoted significant parts of his practice to public interest causes, like supporting our public schools and promoting cleaner airs in our cities. Representative Turner, thank you for being here.
Great to be here. Thank you.
And then finally, last but not least, and this is someone who really needs no introduction, but our moderator is our good friend, Crystal Ratana. Crystal is the Manager of Government and Community Relations for Children's Health. She's also the council member for the town of Farmers Branch, and a member of the North Dallas Chamber Board and Executive Committee. Crystal, thanks so much for doing this. I'll turn it over to you and appreciate your help. And while we're waiting for Crystal to join the stage, we do encourage you all to post questions in the chat. So if you've got any questions for our panelists, Crystal's got some prepared questions, but we also want to hear from you. So post your questions in the chat or send them to me, and we'll try to ask them. Crystal, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jeff, for that introduction. Children's Health is honored to sponsor today's event as longtime members of the North Dallas Chamber. As y'all know, we continue to stay involved and engaged on policy issues affecting our community. So thank you all so much again for joining us this morning to share a small preview of what's to come this next legislative session. So now we'll get started. It's been about a month since the election, and you've had a little bit of time to breathe. And now we're just about a month away from a 140-day session. And so before we get started on our panel discussion, I'd like to give each of you a few minutes to give us a brief district update on what's been going on over the last few months. And so first we'll get started with Senator Johnson.
Thank you. I'm relieved the election's over, even though I didn't want this cycle, but I want to just immediately congratulate my two colleagues in the House, John Turner and Morgan Meyer. I do not want to even approach being a pundit, but I think there is one thing clear from the election, and is that people expect us to work together. It's what we did last session, and we're going to be doing it this session. So I am really looking forward to working with Morgan and John on things that are going to help our region and our state. I also want to thank the North Dallas Chamber. I've long said that the business community in North Texas gets it. I think they've taken a leadership role in this state as far as engaging in government, engaging with their elected officials, and taking a very serious approach to the strength of the civic fabric. That our people depend on our businesses depend on the strength of our people, and I really think that this community has taken an enlightened approach. So I'm proud and pleased to be representing and working with all of you. I would like to just do a real quick overview of the things that I think are going to occupy a lot of our time. Of course, we're going to do redistricting, but that'll probably be in a special session, so we don't have to worry about it. We have a little problem with the budget because we don't have enough money. So that's going to make things very, very difficult. But as far as really big ticket items, we seem to take up major things every few sessions. Last session, it was education. Both of my colleagues here were leaders in that sphere. Both John and Morgan have been very active for a long time in the education sphere. I think this session, the big issue is healthcare. The place I've spent most of my time is on getting more people health insurance. Some people call it Medicaid expansion. I call it Medicaid expansion. But, that phrase, I think, is a kind of a microcosm of some of the things we need to achieve in our political discussions, and that is to kind of lose some of the partisan baggage that's holding us back, whether it was on education last time when the business community came forward and really helped get that over the line by stripping the partisanship away from it. I think we can do the same thing in healthcare. So the major piece of legislation I'm pushing is an 1115 expansion waiver that will allow us to draw down federal dollars at that wonderful 90-10 rate, give another 1 million people health insurance coverage without having to lose control of the way Texas operates its indigent healthcare system. And I think that's critical. So it's going to be, you're asking what's going on in this short period of time here. We're having a lot of conversations. And that really, you run for office and you put the stuff on your flyers and you get your sentences boiled down to 3 or 4 words. But then here now we're on the other side of the election and we actually have to get stuff done. And that takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of patience, a lot of respect for other people's attitudes, sharing of information, leveraging each other's expertise. That's what's going on right now. It's not much of a rest, but it is interesting and gratifying and important. So I'm pleased to be part of it. Lastly, I want to thank and commend the North Dallas Chamber of Commerce, in particular Ken Malcolmson, who showed up in person at my press conference when I was announcing the launch of my Live Well Texas program, and that is this Section 1115 expansion waiver, because the North Dallas Chamber recognizes the importance of the strength of the health of our community to our business community and vice versa. And I hope the rest of the state will follow the lead of the North Dallas Chamber. So thank you for having me, and I look forward to this conversation.
Senator Johnson. Representative Turner, we'll continue with you. I think you're on mute, Representative.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Well, great to be with you today. Thanks again to the North Dallas Chamber and to Ken Malcolmson, Jeff Kittner, and all the sponsors of this event. And it is great to be here with you, Crystal, and with my colleagues, Senator Johnson, Representative Meyer. And I really agree very much with what Nathan said a moment ago. We are here to work together as we move into this session. And I think all of us here on this call have always had a good working relationship, and I'm grateful for that and looking forward to continuing it. This last session was my first term in the legislature, and people told me to expect that the interim might be as busy and as challenging as the session for a new member. I didn't really believe that. After the session ended, we had a significant windstorm in North Dallas, which you all may remember. That was back in June 2019. And I thought, boy, they're right. This has been really challenging to deal with this windstorm, and there was a lot to do there. There were a lot of constituent calls. Little did I suspect what was in store for us for the rest of the interim. District 114, of course, and all of a big part of North Dallas was hit by the tornado back in October, and we are still recovering from that. And then, of course, the pandemic came. And so, honestly, last parts of 2019 and 2020, I can't think of a more challenging year plus for North Dallas and for this district, and of course, really for the entire state and country. And so we've dealt with a lot. In the middle of it, we managed to have an election, and now we're past campaign season, and we're ready to go to work. And I think a lot of what we're going to be dealing with in the session, of course, is dominated by the situation we still face here in the pandemic. And I expect that, frankly, the legislature will continue to have a role in overseeing and in advocating for various decisions that are made by the executive branch related to how we deal with the pandemic and how we continue to respond and how we roll out the vaccine. But then, of course, we have our own big traditional jobs to do in the legislature, the foremost of which is to pass a budget. And I look forward to talking. I'm sure we'll talk more about that here in the discussion today. But clearly a big challenge in front of us as a legislature in passing a responsible state budget. So the need for dedication, coordination, cooperation is really great this year in the Texas legislature. I hope we get off on the right foot and get a good start for the session and are able to do a few important, productive things for the state because it's really a critical time to do so. So I look forward to talking more all about it.
Thank you, Representative Turner. Not least, Representative Meyer.
Thank you, Crystal. I appreciate it. I appreciate being here. Thank for having with and John that we're going to have to work together. Republicans, Democrats, we're all going to have to work together, and especially in these unique times. And Nathan, I too am glad that the election is behind us, for sure. But with that, we have challenges that are upcoming, as Nathan pointed out. The largest one is our budget shortfall, which is going to be about $4.5 billion for my district, and I know for all of our districts. One of the main issues that we're going to be dealing with is maintaining the education funding. That's what I continually hear from folks in my district. HB 3, which was passed last session, which brought hundreds of millions in both new funds and savings to DISD, as well as new funds and savings to HPISD, is something which is critical that we cannot take a step backwards on. I'm sure both Nathan and John agree with me on that, is that we have to make funding education a priority yet again. There are certainly very important issues that we're going to be dealing with as COVID, as a economy, as it relates to making sure Texas's economy continues to grow and come back. But we cannot at all take a step back on education funding. And so for me and my colleagues, I know that is going to be one of the biggest challenges we face, simply due to the budget shortfall. And so that is going to be a priority for all of us next session. And it is going to take all of us working together, as both Nathan and John said. And just for everyone here, we have a great working relationship. The Dallas delegation works together on all issues that affect our region, and we have a great working relationship and look forward to continuing that next session. So thank you again for having us.
Thank you, Representative Turner, and all of you for those brief updates. And now, a lot of you mentioned some of the issues that we'll be discussing this morning. So we'll just go ahead and dive right into some of those. Representative Turner, you touched on this earlier in the impact of COVID-19, which will be felt for years to come across Texas and the nation. This session will be like any other that we've seen for a multitude of reasons. What do you think will be undertaken in this upcoming session to recover from the impact of COVID-19 and to prepare for any future? Representative Turner, we'll go ahead and start with you as well. I believe you're on mute again. Sorry.
Can't believe I did it again. There are a lot of ways, I think, to address that question. Clearly, part of what the pandemic has done is just expose some fault lines in our healthcare system generally. When we had, the COVID-19 recession, of course, you had a lot of people lose their jobs and therefore lose health insurance, and that's a big problem. That's a big issue. We, I think, need to be looking at ways to expand health coverage in Texas, which will help equip us not only to better emerge from this pandemic, but also to prepare for future pandemics and improve the state of healthcare generally in Texas. And I hope that's something that will be on the agenda this year. Senator Johnson already alluded, I think, to that, and he's certainly been a leader in the Senate on trying to encourage the state to accept federal Medicaid funds. And I hope that's something that will be on the agenda for the legislature this year to consider. Now, frankly, I think the legislature has been involved in the pandemic response, even though most of the authority has rested with the governor. But you've had, almost on a weekly basis or nearly so, letters from legislators about various aspects of pandemic recovery, where, for instance, I'm just thinking of letters that I've signed on to. At one point, we encourage the release of more information about pandemic transmission COVID cases in senior care centers. And ultimately, the state did release more data so we could better understand what was happening in those centers. We're going to have a lot of issues related to schools, the question of how school funding is going to be handled in various ways. Of course, may be the subject of legislation, but it'll also likely be just the subject of advocacy and oversight by the legislature. The whole question of how we handle the STAR exams in our schools, that'll be an area that's affected by COVID, of course, that we'll have to address. And then the vaccine rollout. I anticipate that the legislature is going to, again, play either to some degree a legislative role, a formal legislative role, or at a minimum, more likely a role of advocacy and involvement in some of the decisions about the vaccine. All of us, I think, will play a role in providing information to our constituents about the vaccine and how it's going to work and who will be eligible when, and all of that sort of thing. And so I think the legislature is going to be very involved in COVID issues. And of course, the budget itself is very much affected by where we are in COVID. And frankly, whether we have funds with our current revenue structure sufficient to support our commitments up to now, well, that'll depend on whether I think we are controlling the virus and therefore moving to an economic circumstance where our revenues are healthy again. So all of that works together, and I know it'll be a big job to try to stay on top of it, but I hope we're ready to do that.
Thank you, Representative Turner. I know the vaccine is definitely on everyone's mind right now, so we'll definitely look to you all for those updates and see how we can be a part of those very important conversations. So thank you. Representative Meyer, Senator Johnson, anything else you would like to add to that and how we can be better prepared in the future for something like this?
If I could chime in a little bit about, and I'm so glad you asked John that question first, because he did such a great comprehensive job of outlining the answers. On the subject of healthcare, we are looking at possibly 700,000 people losing employer-sponsored health insurance. Many of them are going to be reemployed very quickly. They're not going to need to go on Medicaid rolls. But what I think COVID has done is kind of raise the level of empathy of people, because I think many Texans didn't know people who were struggling in this way. And now your next door neighbor, your brother, they're out of work and they lost their health insurance. And so that increased awareness, I think, is ironically helping the conversation. These are people who work and can't afford health insurance and want to get back to work. And I just want to emphasize the importance of making sure that they don't fall out of the workforce because a non-acute medical condition goes untreated and becomes acute and then impairs their ability to go back and be productive. So having a safety of healthcare coverage for people who suddenly can't afford it is important to getting them back into the workforce. And so when we talk about healthcare, we're not talking about creating dependency. It's quite the opposite. We're making sure that people can take care of themselves and contribute. And COVID has brought that into very, very clear focus and heightened the importance.
Thank you, Senator. You know, we've definitely seen that across the state, and seeing how more organizations are banding together to assist families, some for the very first time. So I agree with you that this pandemic has brought to light some issues that we have already known, but more folks open to helping. And so thank you so much for those comments. We can completely agree, and we all of the time. Representative Meyer, anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think Nathan and John hit it on the head and really got to the core of the issues, that we have to be more open-minded about providing access to healthcare for Texans. We have to be more open-minded about the safety net, which is needed and currently needed, especially in light of a pandemic. And so, therefore, I agree with both John and Nathan as it relates to it. For me, doing that type of expansion, I think you've got to look at it in a more targeted in the segments of our population that need it most. I think that's where we need to look at being able to expand healthcare coverage and do it in a very targeted and focused way. But it is definitely needed, especially in light of the current situation.
And then so it seems like healthcare needs to be the next topic of discussion, and let's dive right into that. Healthcare is the second largest expenditure for the state of Texas, and access to healthcare and expansion of Medicaid is one of our chamber's lead priorities for the upcoming legislative session. Reducing the number of uninsured Texans by securing available state and federal funds to reform and renew opportunities to broaden the coverage of the uninsured. Senator Johnson, you mentioned your bill calling for the Section 1115 expansion waiver, but in your eyes, how do we pass these much needed pieces of legislation that will ensure access to care for our residents? Could you expand a little bit on your plan for that? And then we'll go to comments from the rest of our.
I'd love to. It's Senate Bill 117, which is based very carefully on other states' programs to draw down those federal dollars to expand coverage, particularly states that have Republican-led legislatures or Republican leadership, or both, that have managed, despite having originally opposed a drawdown, a Medicaid expansion, implemented one that works for their state. And they've done a lot of really good things with it. So as far as the key to passing it, address the concerns of conservatives who have previously opposed it, because those concerns were not invalid in many cases. Is this going to work? Yes, we have hindsight, it's working. Are we going to lose control? No. Through an 1115 waiver, we have greater discretion and greater control over the funds. Can we do this economically? Yes. Let's take a look at how this works economically. And the economics, I think, is crucial. I don't think there's any member of the legislature, Republican or Democrat, who doesn't want people to have health care. The concern is, are you fostering dependence on the one hand, or can we afford it? So and I already mentioned that we're not fostering dependence. We're actually getting people to work. I have in the bill measures to help people transition into employment, in fact. But economically, we've kind of hit a new day as well. The pressures of the budget shortfall, the abysmally low insured rate in Texas, we're not just the worst in the nation, we're the worst in the nation by a long way, means that if we manage to bring that uninsured rate down and draw down those federal dollars, we will benefit more than other states do economically. So leading economists and analysts, former chief operating officer of the Department of State Health Services, Ray Perryman, Laura Degg at Texas A&M, Vivian Ho at the Baker Institute at Rice University, all four of them have looked at this. Three of them have done thorough studies of it. They signed a joint letter a couple of weeks ago that says, if Texas implements an ACA drawdown, not a small geographic region or a specific demographic, not targeted, split apart, but the genuine drawdown from the ACA, we actually have a net budget positive with no additional taxes, fees, or anything. So economically, this works. Also, we know, and Republicans and Democrats sometimes fight about this, and on the Republican side is, hey, look, we need lower taxes so we'll have more money in the economy. And that more money in the economy will generate economic activity, which will generate more revenue, so everything will work out. By a similar reasoning, if we do an ACA drawdown, we're going to be pulling in 10 to 12 billion federal dollars that are not presently in our economy. That generates economic activity, again, generating more state and local revenue, again, adding to the economic benefits for Texas. So to your question of how do we pass this, let's really take a hard look at the numbers. No, like what people might have said 8 years ago, what really will happen? We will make money off of taking care of people so they can go to work. And we just have to have a lot of conversations about it. Morgan just mentioned we need to have a more open-minded approach to this, to a lot of things. And we often change our minds when we learn new facts. And so this process we have, it's rather constrained on a timeline. And so we're going to have to work very hard to have these conversations and shoot holes in my bill and fix them, right? But let's not ignore the economics. The economics are in our favor.
You talked about educating folks on what this means. And I think that's a big part of it, because I think a lot of folks don't really understand what it is, what it means to, expand Medicaid, what it means to pass these types of policies. And I think educating the legislators, but also the public on what this actually means, because hospital finance is very complicated. And so dwindling it down, I think, is going to be also crucial during this session. Representative Meyer, do you have any or anything that you're wanting to help tackle this issue of our uninsured here in Texas?
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with Nathan, and I think that the situation itself calls for a full and robust conversation. And I'm someone who has supported Medicaid expansion for children, for new mothers, for very specified groups who needed it the most. And we're going to have that conversation, and we're going to have a conversation. As Nathan stated, we're in a unique time. We're in a place we've never been before. And so therefore, you have to be open-minded about healthcare and coverage to as many Texans as we can. Now, we'll be working with Nathan, I'll be working with John, but I think all of us in the legislature, I think Nathan hit it on the head when he said there's not a Republican or a Democrat that doesn't want health care for Texans. We all do. It's just, how do we get there? And being open-minded to that conversation is the first step. And we are, again, in such a unique time, we have to have those conversations, and we have to work together and across the aisle, Republicans and Democrats alike, to figure out how to provide that health care. And we'll be having those conversations before session begins, I'm sure, and then all throughout session as well. It's an important topic.
Thank you. Representative Turner, anything else you'd like to add?
I'll just say I think it's an important contribution to this discussion, what Nathan said a moment ago, which is when you evaluate the funds that we are already spending as a state on healthcare, and the federal funds we already receive through the various waiver programs, and you compare those expenditures to what we might be spending if we did Medicaid expansion, well, that's an important conversation we need to have. It's sometimes perceived that Medicaid expansion would be a big hit to the budget. Well, the truth is, if you accept Medicaid funds, you're going to be able to rearrange a lot of other funding, some of that present state funding and present federal funding that is in essence there in lieu of the fact that we have not accepted those Medicaid dollars in the sort of straightforward Medicaid expansion fashion. And in the end, by the time you add everything up, it may not be a hit to the budget at all, or not nearly as great as is feared by some, and also have the added benefit of expanding coverage. So those are, I think, important aspects of this discussion that I hope will continue to be closely reviewed.
And Crystal, the complexity of hospital finance, and John has just explained another complexity that I did not, because difficult issues are often misunderstood, and so we have to be careful in how we present things and thorough. And so I'm glad John mentioned the fact that I love the word, I want to steal it, that we have to rearrange some funding. Things that are currently fully funded with state dollars can be funded with federal dollars, which gives us a break. The other thing that we have to take into consideration is the politics of it, just to make this a little more fun. At the national level, all indications seem to be that we will have a Biden administration after January 20th. And even if we had a continued Trump administration, there's a real serious question about whether Texas would continue to receive the federal assistance it has been receiving. Under an old waiver that is now expiring, Texas has applied to continue to get money to basically, I think of it as getting an extension of turning in your homework. We haven't really gotten it together in the indigent healthcare sector. And the federal government has been carrying us for a long time. Time's up. So we're about to lose many billions of federal dollars in healthcare assistance. if we don't do something. And I don't think that the Trump administration would have renewed our old deal. I don't think the Biden administration is going to renew our old deal. So not only are we looking at whether this costs us money or makes us money, if we don't do something, we're going to lose money, a lot of it. So that goes back to what Morgan was saying. The pressure is on us. We're going to have to come up with a way to get this done. And I say SB 117.
And as I mentioned earlier, the healthcare and the expansion of Medicaid and just access to coverage for our underinsured population as well is a huge issue for our chamber. So we very much look forward to continuing these conversations. And I know Ken has been working with you. Thank you all, and Senator Johnson in spearheading this effort. And so we look forward to more to come on that particular issue. We talked about healthcare being the second largest expenditure. Education is the first. Representative Meyer, earlier you touched on HB3 and education funding. During the last session, the House passed House Bill 3, a landmark piece of education legislation that included $11 billion investments to include full-day pre-K, increases in basic allotments, increases in teacher salaries. But with this investment came an increased obligation from the state on funding to receive adequate funding for public education. With the forecasted budget shortfalls for the next biennium and the growing concern that the state will not be fully funding its obligation, what do you think we can do to balance that and continue investing in HB3 and all of the anticipated budgets therein? Representative Meyer, we'll start with you.
Sure. Well, we just have to be, as John was talking about, rearranging and prioritizing and looking to resources that we need, and we have to maintain obligation. I cannot stress that enough. I've served on the Public Education Committee for the last 2 sessions. I was a co-author along with John of HB3, which provided, as you said, the funding. But you've got to be realistic and say, all right, well, these things, these priorities are where we need to put our funds first. We have to be creative. We've got to look at different revenue sources. With the oil and gas tax and sales tax down, but hopefully improving. We will certainly rely on those revenue streams, but then we have to take a look at other revenue streams. We have to take a look at using the rainy day fund. If it's not raining, I don't know all this, and we have to take a look at remaining money left over, which we have in the state of Texas. But we have to take a look and be creative and hit revenue sources to make sure that we maintain the commitment that we made last session. We cannot fund districts at a certain level and then 2 years later pull the rug out and, oh yeah, well, so now you got to go back. We have to invest in our kids. And that, I know both Nathan and John agree with me on, well, I'm pretty sure they agree with me on this issue that you can't hey school districts, here's this amount of funding, and then 2 years later say, okay, well, during the middle of a pandemic, we've got to make, we're going to take a couple of steps back and you're not going to have the resources that we just gave to you 2 years ago. So this has to be a top priority. And then we're going to also have to expand it. Crystal, I'll be out, we have to expand it. And really where I see a source of need is we're going to really have to put in a component for funding for internet access and resources, because not every area of the state has that resource. And I know that, like, my oldest daughter, she goes to on campus one day and then she goes virtual the next. And we have, great internet service. That is not the case everywhere. And so that means that a child going to school may be disadvantaged simply by and the lack of internet access. So my point to you is we have to maintain the funding, but then we're going to have to increase it as it relates to specific needs created by this pandemic. And to me, the internet access issue is huge because no child should be disadvantaged because they have a lack of internet access. Therefore, my point to you is we've got to maintain it, and we're going to have to actually look to expand it because we're in such a unique time, but we have to continue to invest in our children.
Definitely. And I know DISD, trying to find expanding our, our internet access through public-private partnerships. So I think innovation is going to be very key to this conversation as well. Representative Johnson, I'm sorry, Representative Turner.
Well, yes, I agree absolutely with what Morgan just said. I think even in ordinary years, you want the stability of maintaining your commitment from one year to the next. And after this significant achievement last session, House Bill 3 and the increased support for schools, you don't want to suddenly pull it back, and you especially don't want to in light of what schools are dealing with in the pandemic right now and all that we're asking of our teachers and students and families and administrators. It is an important issue, and it's something we need to be prepared to defend in the session. I'll say, I have circled on my calendar, by the way, the date of January the 11th, because that is when the state comptroller will provide the revenue estimate for the upcoming biennium. And we already know that it was back in July, the comptroller told us at that time we were looking at about a $4.5 billion deficit, even just for the remainder of this current biennium that we're in through the end of fiscal year 2021. And of course, in the next session, we'll be writing the budget for the 2022-23 biennium. And we'll hear on January 11th what the comptroller thinks about the revenues that will be available to us. And I think, honestly, that'll be an important day because we'll have a better sense, first of all, of how much we have to make up for the current biennium. And it looks like there will be a deficit that has to be made up. And then we'll get a sense of what is ahead. And we need to then be prepared to use the tools that are available to us. I agree, including the rainy day fund. I think another big issue that we just have to wait and see how it develops is the question of federal aid to states. The U.S. House passed the HEROES Act earlier this summer, which would have provided a significant amount of aid to states, basically for budget falls, but that hasn't moved past the House, and now the U.S. House and Senate are in negotiations basically between each other and within each body about what package might pass. And that also, I think, could be significant for the question of how we handle our state budget. If it's possible that we receive federal funding to help us through this shortfall, then that will make a difference in the sorts of decisions we have to make. And so those are two big, I guess, questions that I'm looking forward to seeing the answer to. One, what does our own biennial revenue estimate look like? And two, what kind of federal help will we get?
Right, now, if I might hop in, I agree with John 100%. And we did have some good news either yesterday or the day before when Comptroller Hager said actually that it was improving and it wasn't going to be as bad as what we originally thought. So I'm with John. I'm very interested, but in light of at least some good news that the economy is improving at such a scale that it wasn't going to be as bad. But to John's point, we'll need to take a look in January and see exactly where we stand.
And Crystal, can I build on something that Morgan was talking about, our commitment to students, teachers, schools, parents, the whole state. We just did this, and at a time, this is way zooming out, but people need to have faith in their institutions. The voucher pushback in schools was because it undermined a faith in our public institution of education. If we don't live up to the funding commitment, we're going to undermine people's faith in the institution of government further at a time when we really can't afford to do that. So we really need to find a way to keep this commitment. And we didn't make the commitment lightly. This was the product of years and years of hard work by people. So I can't overemphasize the importance of making good on, it's not even a promise, it's a decision about how we're going to do things. And it will be hard, and January 11th will give us some ideas about how we have to go about doing this. We do hope the federal government will help us out some. They don't have a balanced budget amendment, but balanced budget requirement. We do. We have to balance the budget. So it would be very helpful to see some of those dollars come in from the feds to help us make ends meet.
And so, Senator Johnson, that brings me actually, that's a great segue to my next. What are some of the new revenue sources that you think the state should explore?
You give me that one. Thanks. Morgan.
Well, and I mean, I know some of you all talked about supporting the rainy day fund. I know that's something that's going to be brought up this session. So I would love to have you explore a little bit on that as well. Sure.
I wholeheartedly agree with my colleagues. The rainy day fund is there to help us in times like when you have a pandemic that crushes your economy. So we're going to draw upon it. We're going to have to draw upon it to make up current shortfalls. We're going to have to draw upon it to address next year's shortfalls. We can't wipe the whole thing out because we don't know how long this state of affairs is going to continue. I am optimistic that we're going to continue rebounding better than was originally predicted. But we do have to maintain some ability to deal with future events. People are going to have to look at ways to find efficiencies in government and reduce some costs, find efficiencies in the way we administer programs that can reduce costs. I know everybody sharpens budget axes, but it's difficult in Texas to find fat or fraud or waste or abuse, because we've run in many ways, laudably run a very efficient public sector. But when you run a very efficient public sector, it's hard to go in and make cuts. There will be things cut, I'm sure, but we also have to look at alternative revenue sources. Without advocating for any in particular on this call, I can tell you things that were discussed last session and that will be discussed this session. Our state gas tax has been frozen at 1991 levels, not coincidentally, since 1991. And it doesn't have the purchasing power that it used to have. Cars go farther. It's a smaller fraction of the overall prices. 20 cents in 1991 is not as good as 20 cents today. Do we need to move that? Maybe, probably. Should it be a gas tax or should it be a vehicle miles traveled? I know that we all know that electric cars are a very small segment of the market. It's expected that they will grow. Other places, we have many holes in the tax code. And without saying that pejoratively, there are reasons to provide exemptions to taxation. And sometimes they're very good reasons. And sometimes those good reasons expire as the economy changes. So which of our tax breaks were useful at the time they were implemented and are no longer useful? Let's see if we can close some of those, bring in a few more dollars there. And this would be a great time to be bailed out by my colleagues as to where else we can get money. There are cuts, there are taxes, there are efficiencies. An energy tax, that was discussed. Increasing the sales tax, that was discussed and rejected. But these are all things that people discussed and will be discussed again.
Representative Turner, do you have anything else to add?
Well, sure. And this is, of course, a difficult discussion. This is one reason I mentioned January 11th a little while ago, is because I think, truthfully, no one wants to have a discussion about new revenue sources until you really know what the situation is and how bad it is and how much that may be needed. And of course, talking about any kind of new taxes during we've just been through a recession, it appears, and really are in essence still emerging from it. And we're still dealing with the pandemic, and people are struggling to pay their bills and their rent. It's a really tough time to even talk about new sorts of taxes or new revenues of any kind. And I think, frankly, we want to avoid it if it is at all possible. That's why I think we need to see where we stand on January the 11th and see what our revenue situation looks like and get a better sense of what Congress is going to do. Senator Johnson's absolutely right. The federal government does not have the balanced budget requirement that we have. The federal government is able to help out states in a crunch at a time like this. And I think we should be willing, to receive that help and to apply it, and frankly encourage the federal government to provide it, because it does increase the burden on everyone if we have to consider new kinds of revenue sources. Now, there may be some things that can be looked at and need to be looked at in order to make sure we defend our commitment to schools and to important public health programs. We need to, in my opinion, be pragmatic about the entire issue. But the good news is, as Morgan said a second ago, things do not appear right now as bad as they did in the summer. When we were looking at this issue back in July, for all we could tell, it was going to be a very difficult budget session. I still think it will be a difficult one, but it doesn't look like it's as dire, perhaps, as it was before. We have received quite a bit of help already through the CARES Act. We may receive more through more congressional stimulus. The economy has performed somewhat better in the last few months than probably was anticipated in the summer, in June and July. And so I think we just need to see how close we are with the present revenue structure, potentially tapping significantly the rainy day fund to sustaining the commitments we need to sustain, and then have the conversation at that point.
Thank you, Representative. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I'll just be honest. I would oppose any type of tax increase of any type in any sector, whether it's sales tax, whether it's energy, whether it's gas. I don't think that's where we need to go. I think we need to focus on the rainy day fund, on the CARES Act, on the governor's cuts to different agencies. I believe he had a 5% cut to different agencies. See where that yields, and then see where we land on January 11th. And kind of see where that falls. That's where I think we really need to focus is where are we, and then taking a look at those three revenue sources I just mentioned, the 5% cut in the agency budget, the CARES Act, rainy day fund, and then see where we are. So that's where I would focus.
Thank you, Representative. And we have a number of questions that have come through. So I can go on with some of those right now. We'll take a little break from our from some of the questions that we had before, and I'll go ahead and start asking some of these from our audience. And I'll go with, first we have a question from North Dallas Chamber of Commerce board member Phil Meanders, and it's related to infrastructure. Infrastructure usually helps recoveries. What are the priorities for transportation and water and other infrastructure programs? And I'll open it up to any of you all who'd like to take on that question.
I'll start. I think the state needs to take a much friendlier attitude towards managed tolling construction of highways. This is the private sector venturing private capital on future returns. It doesn't require, not only does it not require the state to put in a bunch of money, the state's not risking a bunch of money. And as the questioner indicates, creation of infrastructure always generates economic activity, always helps people. We have to be smart about which roads we build, of course, but I happen to think we've got a lot of really capable people in our regional transportation authorities who do an excellent job of planning and consulting with regions about what will work and what won't and what's responsible development. But the opposition to the public-private partnership in the transportation sector needs to go away, and I think we should be embracing it. Incidentally, was not always my view. It's one of the things that I became more educated about and said, I guess I was wrong. And that's okay, I think. I hope other people will reach the same conclusion and make the same change of mind.
Any other thoughts on that question? All right, we'll go ahead and go to our next question, which is from Priscilla Camacho, talking about investing in economic recovery. Investing in higher education, especially community colleges, will be critical to our economic recovery. Those who have lost jobs in this pandemic, by and large, need reskilling and upskilling to obtain the jobs that are available today and in the future. Where do you stand on continuing level investments in higher ed, and what can we do to help you ensure we don't experience cuts in the next legislative session?
Well, sure, I will take a swing at that one, and thanks for the question, Priscilla. And yes, agreed. Higher education is clearly going to be critical. The last session was a major session for public education. Before we got into the pandemic, I think there was a lot of talk about this coming session being not only about healthcare, but also about higher education and progress there. We did ask our colleges and universities, with the exception, I believe, of community colleges in Texas, to take the 5% cuts or find 5% cuts in their budget during this interim after we faced the recession from the pandemic. And so they're hurting as a result of that. Many of them have had to lay people off, and of course have lost tuition revenues as well, and are struggling like so many institutions are to function during the pandemic. And so it's a difficult time for colleges and universities also. My hope is that, again, the budget situation will not be so dire that we are going to have to face, more cuts in higher education, and that we can find the political will to defend our level of funding in higher education, and in fact support the formula funding that is there, and maybe even continue some progress from last session in additional research funding for our institutions of higher learning. I'm hopeful that will be the case. I think it really does depend on the overall budget situation. There's a broad agreement, at least it appears among those of us here on this call, about the importance of defending House Bill 3 and the commitments made there. I think there will be broad support for healthcare funding, a robust level of healthcare funding. And then I think right behind those will have to be higher education, in my opinion. It's not going to be a session where we'll be able to do a whole lot of things that, we would do in a year where we're flush with cash, where we just have more money to spend than we know what to do with. That's not the session we're facing here. I think we have to be realistic. It's not going to likely be a session where we make our largest ever investments in areas like higher education, but I do think we can, with the political will, defend the level of commitment we've made and hopefully boost it to help our colleges and universities through this difficult time.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add to what John just said, and I agree, is access to community college. By community college, I believe, especially in these times, having access to higher education is critical. And whatever we can do to allow community colleges to continue to play the very vital role that they currently play, but also expanding the access to community colleges and courses that are offered and what degrees you can achieve at community colleges. Is sometimes the avenue is much more affordable and much more accessible for many in our community, and we need to make sure that the community colleges continue to have that prominent role to provide that type of higher education, and so that's going to be a priority as well.
And just a plug for the North Dallas Community College system and some of the things they've been doing lately. Again, we're privileged to live in this district because that system has been such a tremendous benefit to our state and continues to lead in their ways. And some of the things we can do to support higher education can be small. For example, with Dallas County Community College system, they're finding that there are students who are unable to enroll because their meningitis vaccine is not up to date and it costs, I can't remember, it's $170 or $300, and they just don't have it. And a lot of it has to do with the timing of when you get your second shot, your booster to your vaccine. Very simple change. We have it administered in the public school system. It will be paid for by federal dollars a couple years earlier, so they don't go to start college and can't afford it and just skip it. I know that sounds small, but I trust the people at the community college who have studied this and determined that this is a real obstacle. So where can we make changes other than money that are going to facilitate people attaining higher education? Money is helpful too. I hope we have it, and I think it's extremely important that we support higher education. But we need to look at other ways as well to help that system function optimally.
Definitely. And to your point, Rosetta Meyer, options, having all of these options for all different levels of our students, I think is definitely key. And the Dallas Community College districts are those that are helping fill that gap. Thank you all so much for those comments on higher ed. I know a lot of our guests here, that's definitely a priority for them as well. Going on to one of our next questions. This is from Mike Sly with the City of Kaufman. Last session's failed SB 29 public resource for lobbying is so detrimental to local political jurisdictions. Many smaller jurisdictions are so reliant on advocacy efforts from the North Texas Commission, Texas Municipal League, AC, TAB, and so many other organizations that any future efforts to limit our ability to communicate with our elected delegation could be so harmful. What are your thoughts or comments on this issue?
Well, I'll be glad to start there, and thank you for the question. And in my opinion, we have our hands full already in this legislative session. Again, with the big challenges related to education, healthcare, budget, the pandemic. It's my hope that this isn't an issue that becomes, I guess, a major focus in this legislative session. I think right now our local governments most definitely need support from the legislature, and we need a good working relationship. It is apparent to me that Senate Bill 29, which did not pass last session, but which did make it to the House floor for a vote, is one of those issues that creates division between state and local government. There's no doubt in my mind that we need good communication between those levels of government. There has to be a way for especially smaller jurisdictions, as the question alluded to be able to monitor legislation, to know what's going on, and if they engage people to help them do that, or if they have people on their own payrolls that interact with legislators in order to make that communication effective and productive. I think it's beneficial to all. By the time we ended up voting on SB 29 last time, as I recall, that bill was basically saying okay, state and local governmental officials could have people contracted to talk about legislators about some issues, but not others. And it would require some sort of monitoring, literally inside the scope of a conversation about what you could discuss and what you couldn't discuss. I think it was becoming rather unworkable. There then was a carve out for smaller jurisdictions that didn't apply to our big cities in Dallas. In the end, it just generated a lot of, I think, confusion and really more heat than light. So my hope is that it doesn't become an issue that is, a big priority in this legislative session, given all that we have to deal with the other issues.
And I'm glad John took a thorough, intelligent approach to it, and I would just call it petty partisan garbage. I don't think it has any place in our legislature. I think the cities should be able to have representation just like the private industry has representation. I don't think we ought to interfere with that market of communication. As legislators, we rely on experts, people who understand these issues to relay the message. I think this is just kind of left over from some internal squabbling, and it needs to go away.
Thank you all for your comments on that. I think we have another question from Denise Gomez with Children's Health. During the last legislative session, Senate Bill 10 established the Texas Child Mental Health Care Consortium to foster collaboration amongst our state medical schools, promote and coordinate mental health research, and help address workforce issues. Mental health disparities have also been brought to light during this pandemic. What can we anticipate from you to help continue the momentum that SB 10 began to improve mental health in Texas?
Well, it's a huge issue. It's very, very important. As I said, being on the Public Education Committee, we had a number of both parents and students come through and discuss the mental health issues, especially during trying of times. We have to make sure that our children have the best access to mental health professionals as we can provide. We have to continue to push that ball forward because the ratios of students to health professionals is ridiculous in a bad way. We need to be able to provide that access to our students, and we need to continue to push that ball forward. I had a bill that last session that unfortunately didn't pass that would have reduced the ratios of students to healthcare professionals. I plan on refiling that and pushing that ball forward. But the mental health of our students, especially now, is of great importance, and it is every type of issue that you can think of that our students are going through. We have to provide them access to healthcare professionals who can assist.
I just want to nice, Crystal. It's just that nobody knew how timely that bill was going to be. That mental health consortium. The advent of COVID has made that manifold more valuable. I mean, really. It was important to do in the first place, but this has been really hard on young people. So I'm hopeful. I'm glad that we did it, and I'm hopeful that it does some good. But I was just talking to some mental health professionals yesterday, and they were pointing out that while we have done good work the past few sessions at deploying more resources to mental health and better understanding the problems, we still have kind of a patchy system. And young people, older people get some form of care specifically, and then they kind of fall off. And we need to work at kind of closing the gaps in that network. And I know that's pretty abstract, but we need to give that a lot of attention and try to stitch something together better than what we have now. But I am pleased that we did something significant, and it's doing a lot of good for people. Definitely, and I know it's helped institutions like Children's to be able to offer some of those services to some of our lower income children that have those mental and behavioral health needs. So thank you all for championing that piece. We will continue to take questions, but I know one question that is on everyone's mind is really what's session going to look like with COVID numbers still rising across the state. This has the potential to be a very unusual legislative session since we're not out of COVID-19 pandemic yet. And so I know the chamber, we're planning on a day at the state library, which is also still in flux because we don't know what that's going to bring. But what do you see the session looking like? What are some of the conversations that you had
And how will you all be running your offices? Is it going to be different than before? So would love to get some insights from you all on that regard.
Sure, and I'll begin with that. Great question. And frankly, there's still a lot that hasn't been resolved. Where we are in the process, at least in the House, I believe, is there is now a working group dealing with possible changes to the rules. And if we're really going to do anything significantly different in the House than normal, most likely rules changes will be required. For instance, if we were to have virtual committee hearings, virtual testimony, if we were to be able to vote other than physically in person on the floor of the House, those require rules changes. And there are tricky issues that have to be worked out. My sense is that the prevailing sentiment is we want to be safe. We need to be responsible. We need to take care not only of members, but of course of a staff and the entire advocacy community that's regularly in a normal session in the Capitol and involved in the process. And we don't want to allow the session as a whole to become risky or a spreading event. And frankly, we need to set, in my opinion, a good example for the rest of the state and how we conduct our own business. I think some of the big issues that are going to be resolved soon, at least in the House, and I know the Senate will have its own discussions, and then ultimately some level of coordination between the two. Are we going to be able to meet virtually as committees? Are we going to be able to have votes through some kind of remote system that would involve voting other than physically present in the chamber? And then I think what's going to happen to access to the Capitol. My sense is that there will be a level of access to the Capitol, but I don't think it's going to be the normal level where you have large tour groups and school groups and lobby days and things of that sort. That's going to have to be curtailed. The other aspect of this dynamic that I think we're really having to think about is the possibility that midway, through the session, at some point, the vaccines become widely enough available that a large portion of those involved in the legislative session can be vaccinated, and maybe at that point you move to a somewhat more normal session. But that remains to be seen. I do think you'll have mask requirements, in my opinion, for members. I think individual members' offices will have varying levels of safety protocols. Just speaking personally, I plan to do as much as we can virtually to minimize visitors in the office, to minimize time by staff in the office, and to be wearing masks in the office when we are there. And I think each office is hammering out those protocols individually. But again, I think it's important that we as a legislature not only be safe ourselves and for the benefit of those we interact with, but also set the right example in these critical remaining months before we have vaccines widely available.
I would add only that I don't like the idea of a throttled session where we all pick our top 3 bills and recognize that we're just not going to get a lot done. We were elected to get a lot done, and whether we have to use masks or HEPA filters or virtual meetings, figure it out. We've got to get the work done, and we've got to be safe about it. And I think it's possible to do both.
Thank you. Anything else you would like to add, Representative Meyer?
I think, John, from a House perspective, absolutely covered.
We do have a couple of questions. I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions that have come in from our audience. One again from Phil. Texas Central High-Speed Rail recently met some major milestones to move forward. How do you see the legislature continue to deal with this major transportation initiative?
Well, high-speed rail, if I might first just say, that is crucial. It is one of the most important. I said it prior to last session, and I believe I was on a panel with both Nathan and John. What the number one issue last session, or for me, and I believe this region, was protecting high-speed for our state to continue to protect the high-speed rail initiative. I think it's going to be crucial for our economy on a go-forward basis, especially with our economy as it improves and so forth. We need to continue to have this type of infrastructure there. So it is by far one of the top issues for me, and I'm sure for Nathan and John is making sure that comes to fruition. And I couldn't be happier about the milestones that they're meeting and the great job that the high-speed rail folks are doing.
And as you mentioned earlier, infrastructure usually helps with economic recovery. So to your point, those types of projects are very crucial to our state. So Representative Turner, do you have anything else to add to that?
I agree with that 100%. I think this is a great example of an issue that we can work well together on as a Dallas County delegation and hopefully also just as a DFW group of legislators, and because of the benefits that would bring to our region and of course to our state too. We know there is legislative opposition to the high-speed rail. I'm sure that will continue. But again, I just think it's an important element of progress for our state, and I hope we can work together on it. I see no reason to think that the pandemic circumstances should, slow this down or call it to a halt in any way. I'm not convinced by those arguments. I hope we can maintain the progress toward high-speed rail in Texas.
Thank you. And I think we'll take one last question and then we'll go ahead and wrap up. And this one's from our fearless leader, Ken Malcolmson. Any commentary on the presumed Speaker of the House? Last but not least.
Yeah, I'll take it. So Chairman Phelan and I came in together, and he is going to be fantastic. I doubt he's going to be a phenomenal speaker and leader of the House. He's reasonable, he's trusted, and that's key. All of that is key. I think he's just going to do a fantastic job without.
I also am looking forward to working as well as possible with Presumptive Speaker Phelan. I think Morgan knows him better than I did. I think they were classmates, if I remember correctly, came in at the same time, and right. And therefore you have known him longer than I have. But I had a number of interactions with him on different business in the last session, and he's very knowledgeable. He seems to be someone who understands issues, and I think has in the process of preparing for the speakership made an effort to reach out to all corners of the House and make sure people know that they can be involved and that they can try to, through their own work and research and diligence on any issue, contribute. And I think that's important for the House. And so my hope is that we will be able to work well as a House under Presumptive Speaker Phelan.
Thank you both so much for those comments. I think that is all the time we have. We've had a lot of questions come through, so I apologize if we did not get to your questions, but thank you all so much. We at Children's Health are, again, honored to work with you all and to sponsor this event again this year, to hear from, get insights from our electeds. And so thank you all again for spending time with us, sharing space with us. And with that, I will turn it over back to Jeff Kittner to close out our program.
Thank you so much, Crystal, for your outstanding moderation, as always. Thanks again to State Senator Johnson, State Representative Meyer, State Representative Turner for participating in a very robust discussion. I think we learned a lot today, and we're looking forward to the session, whatever it may look like. As a token of our appreciation for all of our speakers during our fiscal year, we'll be making a donation in your names to the North Texas Food Bank at the end of our fiscal year. Thanks again to our sponsors, Atmos Energy, Children's Health, North Texas Commission, and Charter. I do want to recognize we have quite a few elected officials in attendance in the audience. So in addition to Crystal and our representatives in the legislature, we've got Town of Addison Councilmember Guillermo Quintanilla, City of Richardson Councilmember, ISD Trustee Dustin Marshall, RISD trustees Jean Bono, Eric Eager, and Karen Clardy. And I think I even saw RISD Superintendent Jeannie Stone. So thanks to all of you for participating. A friendly reminder that although Representative Meyer and Representative Turner have no election ongoing, we do have a DISD trustee race. Dustin Marshall's race is ongoing for early voting right now. That's in a runoff. So if you live in DISD District 2, get out and vote in that race. And finally, please visit ndcc.org for a list of our upcoming programs. If you enjoyed this one, we've got a few more programs coming up that are all virtual. We've got a Public Safety Committee meeting tomorrow at noon, talking about the DPD efforts to reduce street racing. We've got a leadership briefing with Dallas Education Foundation Executive Director Mita Havlick next Tuesday on December 8th. We've got our big Transportation Crossroads Conference, one of our biggest conferences of the year, that'll also be presented via Remo. We'll hear from State Senator Johnson at that conference as well. And Texas Comptroller Glenn Hagar will be our keynote speaker there. We've got a Civics for Business on doing business as a force for good on December 14th, and then a big holiday mixer party on December 15th. All the information can be found at ndcc.org. I'll put a link to that in the chat. And then finally, we'll keep the room open for networking. So stick around. Feel free to jump around to the tables, network with our legislators and others here. And otherwise, thanks to everybody who participated via Remo, as well as all of you who are watching us on WebEx. And with that, we will close this out, and we'll see you at the networking.